All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. If you don't know where you are at MNSpec, living with a writer slash artist slash creatively driven person slash why did I get into this? My name is Merriam, and we're going to do, I volunteer to moderate because I'm crazy that way. And we're going to start with some introductions. And I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and what they do, and who is their relevant partner and what their partner does. And then we'll start throwing out some questions. So I'll start with Christina.
Hello, I'm Christina, and I'm Conrad's wife. That's Conrad over there. And my day job, I'm a high school art teacher, and he's a writer and a musician and a creative person with lots of projects. Is that okay?
Yeah, all right.
I'm full Staffin Wiebe. I'm married to Aubrey Staffin Wiebe there, and I work as a research scientist for GE Power and water making water filtration apparatus in Minnetonka.
I'm Eric Clark. I'm husband of Dana Baird, and my day job, I'm a field technician for the St. Paul Public Schools. I've also worked as a graphic designer and a photographer.
And to complete my introduction, I'm married to Michael Merriam, who is a writer and a stage performer. And my day job is I am a counselor and psychotherapist. And my bit of self-promotion is I am accepting new clients, and I serve the geek community, and I have pamphlets and brochures and business cards over there. Writers know about self-promotion, so I figured that'd be okay. And so kind of the first question that I wanted to throw out, not that we have to be in a strict Q&A format, we're going to involve the audience and all that, but just kind of get the conversation rolling. One thing I wanted to throw out there was, I'm curious among the folks up here, like, how did you get into this? Did you know what you were getting into, or did it come later?
Well, I already was in it because I was a creative myself. So,
you know, I would say that Aubrey was not writing as much, if at all, when we first started dating. But I could see that she was going insane by not doing it. So a certain amount of butt kicking and you should start writing again was involved. But I didn't know exactly what monster I
it was actually kind of similar for me. I mean, you know, Dana was, when I met her, she was a fine art student. She was finishing up her degree in fine art. And, you know, I was a graphic designer, photographer, bartender, you know, slash at the time. And it took a few years into, you know, when we were together, one day she was talking about her writing and she was telling me about this big story and stuff, and I'm like, why are you telling me, you know, write this down, let's go, let's go, you know, start the car here. So,
So when I met Conrad, he was not writing, but one of the things we bonded on was that we were both readers of speculative fiction. And he was a musician and a philosophy student when I met him. And so I thought that was awesome. Being a creative myself, found that really, I always wanted to be a musician. So I thought that was great. And, you know, then he wrote me a song and game over. So. And it came later that he started writing. And it just became a huge, huge part of his life, and I certainly encourage that, and I think it's more productive than playing video games, so I think it's a good thing.
I would agree with that. For me, it was sort of like you guys have talked about. Michael had a previous career of writing poetry before we met, but that had stopped before we met because the first wife was not terribly supportive. She actually threw away his antique typewriter. And so he wasn't writing much when we met. But then later he like started getting into it more and more and more. And so that was something that came much later. And like you guys said, it's making you crazy not to write, so I want you to write. And that's kind of something I wanted to ask you guys about. And sort of part of the inspiration of the panelists. What's it like to live with a writer or an artist? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Patience.
Patience.
Lots of patience.
As in it requires lots of patience?
Yes.
And why is that?
They're struggling, they're trying to get this idea out. Sometimes that takes minutes, days, hour, you know, I mean, it can take weeks for that idea to solidify. And you just have to have the patience and the support to just sit there and say, you'll get it, you know, and pat on the back.
I think there's different kind of stages in the writing. There's the moment of inspiration where they're writing and they want to write till they can stop, until they never stop, so they just want to keep going. So that's always fun because they can't be intruded upon in some ways during that time. But then there's the other part, which is just the grind. You know, the editing, the part of the book that they don't want to write, but they have to write. And both of those are just different difficulties, because in one case you've got somebody doing work they really don't want to do. And so that they're miserable because they're doing work they don't want to do. And on the other hand, you've got someone who doesn't want to be interrupted, and so living with them when they don't want to be interrupted can be very difficult.
I think you have to, because you're right, it's a long process. I think you have to be willing as a partner to give them their space, their creative space, and they aren't always available to you. They might be in the other room, but they're really not available to you. I mean, you could sit and bug them, but I think that would cause some stress between you and that type of thing. To sort of be able to read that person and know when they're giving you kind of nonverbal signals of and they really are kind of in the middle of a thought, and to I think be confident in yourself as a partner, but not take it personally, and just the busier I am, the more I'm okay with it. I'm a teacher, so in the summer I am not as busy, so I have to find projects for myself, and he has more projects than I do, so I need to, not get sad or lonely and find other people to be with or other projects to do. But I think also that the person you're living with, your writer partner, needs to also have a sense of your needs too, so it kind of goes both ways. And I would say my partner is pretty good at giving me some time, even when maybe we trade off.
I would definitely agree with that. It's a balance. Like yesterday, for example, Michael, I was supposed to be out of the house all day. There was a workshop I was supposed to attend, literally from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. yesterday. And I wound up canceling going to that. But originally the plan was he was going to have writer day, because I was going to be out of the house all day, and it was just going to be him and the cats and the writing. And he was probably really looking forward to that. And because I know he very rarely gets an entire day of the house to himself. I mean, to a writer, that's like gold, I know. And I wound up having to cancel going to this workshop because of a variety of factors. And all of a sudden, instead of him having the whole day to himself, all he had was the morning while I was going for something. And then we wound up running errands in the afternoon, and that was something that was mutually negotiated as well. Actually, no, this is a good time to get this stuff done. And then the evening wound up being a few different things. And so instead of having writer day, he had writer morning, which is a very different thing. And I know that. And so we had a few discussions of, are you sure you're okay with this? I mean, I can still leave you alone the rest of the day. We don't have to run those errands. And so sometimes you make sacrifices for each other. Sometimes he comes with me when I'm going to an out-of-town conference, and he has a writer weekend in the hotel while I'm off doing conferencey things. And so, like you said, it's that kind of balance of where you negotiate with each other of whose turn is it to get their needs met today. And it can't always be one person's turn. And I think that that's the case anytime you have a set of limited resources, because when you're a creative person who's trying to have a creative career of some type, you probably also have a day job or other responsibility of some type that takes up a lot of your time. So now you're juggling two really big important things, and possibly also on top of kids or other responsibilities, or taking care of your parents or whatever else. And so you're juggling all of these really important things, and then you have a partner who also has a set of needs. And so you're trying to balance each other's needs, and I think that negotiation is really important. So I'm glad you mentioned.
When, about 2 months ago, when Opera was finishing up Circus Nebraska going for publications, all this other stuff, she's got to format it and all this crazy stuff that she needs to do. As the day got closer and closer, things around the house, things in general, just started getting dropped because there was not enough hours in the day. So you kind of pick up and you do as much as you can to kind of help things out. But I think one of the important things is just informing the other person, hey, I know you're in a big push to try and hit a deadline. Get that. Realize the walls are falling down, and we should probably work on rebuilding them as soon as you're through this crunch. But again, that kind of open communication of what you're of what's going on, and I realize you can't see it because right now you are at the bottom of a well trying to find your way out.
Right.
But you're going to find a different well when you get out of it.
This is not the time for passive aggressive expecting your partner to mind read, because they are literally in another world.
Yep.
And if you're expecting them to read your mind, are you going to be disappointed? So it's just a lot better if you don't do that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. Wait, let's see. We had a list of questions provided for us, I think, by Michael when he wrote up our, so I'm especially interested.
I see.
Uh-huh.
Pretty loaded question.
Well, and for full disclosure, as Eric alluded to before we got started, as a few of us were chatting, this panel sort of is a reprise of a panel that Eric and I did several years ago at Convergence. And
45 years ago.
yeah, and it was Eric and me and Cynthia Booth, Roy Booth's wife. And it was inspired by a conversation that I had sitting around with Scott Lynch's wife at the time about what it's like to be married to a creative type. And she and I were kibitzing about, hey, we should do a panel at Convergence. And so she and I proposed that. And then she wasn't able to attend, and so we wound up kind of scrambling to get people, and we literally dragged Eric up, I think at the last second.
Yeah, I walked in to sit down with you guys, and said, get up here.
So he was a real champ about it, which I appreciated. And so when Michael was sort of brainstorming discussion topics for MNSpec, I said, we did this conversation a long time ago at Convergence, and wouldn't this be a fun thing to bring to MNSpec? Okay, so one of our questions is, how do you deal with your writers during difficult times? We talked about communication. What else?
Just support, just be there.
Or not.
Yeah, or not, if if you're in the way, get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
You just do what you can, to.
Well, my writer, he has a writing space. So he has a studio in, that is his space, and I come down
It's a
there.
separate physical address?
Not
It's
quite.
the man cave, the basement, but it's his studio, it's where all his music stuff is, and he's got a great chair and a desk, and I come down, I am allowed to go in there and everything, but it is his space. And because the kid is off at college, and there's plenty of space in the house. So I think it's important to have individual spaces, and that's really been very helpful for us. So if he goes in there and closes the door, it's not like I can't go in there, but I do respect that is he's kind of saying I'm working when the door is closed, and so I might come in and ask him a quick question or whatever, but and then because we can have different spaces indoors, I can also be doing loud things in other places too. So it wouldn't work for me if I had to be silent and tiptoe around because he's working. That wouldn't fly.
Like in a common area that you had to tiptoe around.
Yeah, because, you know, it just wouldn't work. So I think having a designated space for the writer to do their writer thing is very important.
So, yeah, we've had for much of the time in our current house, we've had the separate space. But before that, we lived in a studio apartment where there is absolutely no separate space. You know, I can remember telling her to stop clickety-clacking on the keyboard in the middle of the night because she was still writing. And you know, I can remember, you know, right now it's actually it's a very different one. The little girl took the office. So babies, they do this. All of a sudden, they need their own room, and then the office no longer is the office, and there's a crib inside, and so the writing doesn't happen there. And so instead, now she's on the dining room table, but that means I'm essentially in the same room. And so now I go, you know, I'll be on the internet like we all are, and I'll find a cute cat video, or be watching a movie, and there'll be an awesome fight scene. I'll be like, hey, honey, you have to come see this, and she could be in the middle of whatever she's doing, and that's highly disruptive. So being able to get that kind of separate space is really useful, just to help close things off. Because the other thing is, when they're lost in their own world in the same room, it can sometimes be even more separating than when they're, you know they're going upstairs to go write. It means that you can get locked in this. You're in the same room, but you're not interacting. So it's still separate. Whereas at least if they go to their room, you know, hey, when they're there, they're doing writing. When they're not there, they're disconnected from the writing, so that they can be more available.
I have a friend who's got a husband and 2 kids, and the spray bottle we use for the cats, if somebody comes in the room when she's writing, she sprays them.
Quite the deterrent.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm glad that doesn't get used on me, because I have been known to interrupt. I try to be respectful.
Back at him?
But
See, like I said, for me, I mean, it's a little different because, one, I am a creative myself, but two, like, okay, I have ADD. She doesn't, okay? So she can be, you know, so I gotta understand things like hyperfocus, where you get involved in a project and you just can't get out of it, you know, and you just have to sit there and code this thing until it's done or whatever, and you just, you know, it's hyperfocus, and, you know, I do personally suffer from that sometimes. But when she's writing, or in an art project, or like in the middle of a sewing project or something, if she's upstairs and she's, you know, if she's not coming down to me and yelling at me about the, you know, how the skirt didn't work out or something, then I know everything's okay. You know, if she come running down and she's all mad and stuff, you know, something's wrong. Okay, if she's up there and it's quiet, the music's on. Okay, I know everything's good. So yeah, sometimes you just have to give it a space.
Yeah.
Now, like in our house, you know, both our computers are upstairs. Well, I have one that I remote with a lot, so I can just do it from anywhere. So I'll sit down on the couch if she's upstairs. I'm still using that computer up there, but you know, I'm not in her physical space.
yeah, we're actually planning on redesigning the way our home is we're using our space, our spare rooms in our home right now, because it's not very efficient the way we're using it right now. And right now Michael doesn't have a good space of his own. And the space that he does have, it winds up sort of being his mental headspace for like paying bills and doing other home office related tasks that aren't related to writing. And so when he tries to use that space, he doesn't feel very creative. And so we're kind of looking into thinking of how are we going to like reuse the spare rooms that we have, so that he can have a space that's like home office-y but also has space for creative headspace. What he winds up doing now a lot is we also, because I'm self-employed and I have really weird hours. I work 2 evenings a week. I teach on Saturday mornings, and so I'm away from the home a lot. And so when we are both home, we have a preference for being in the same room because we don't get to be together a lot. But I also want to stay out of his way, and so he'll usually put the headphones on, and to me that's the signal of I love you, but shh. And so when the headphones are on, I try as much as I can. Like, he's 8 feet away, but yet he's 8,000 miles away, and to try to let him stay there. And then if I really need something, then I can ask, but as much as possible. that's the compromise we've got right now.
And the other thing is to not just run up and say, hey, Michael, can you, and just, just try to tear him out of that.
Right.
You want to say, Michael, I need to talk to you in a minute.
Right,
When
yes.
you get a second. And
Yeah.
walk away.
Yes, exactly.
And they will come to you within a few minutes and say,
Right.
okay, what do you need?
Yes.
Once they're out of that headspace.
Exactly.
You hope.
That's a wonderful point, like.
Yeah, you hope.
They don't come down 2 hours later.
You can give them a reminder in 15
Right.
minutes.
Don't let it be like, what is it? Kubla Khan or whatever it is, where like you interrupt them so much that whatever it is lost.
Yeah.
But let them have a moment to wrap up their thoughts. Which I think any of us need with any project that we're working on, so I can be respectful of that.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what if you really want to build up your writer's career? And you know that this is, you rather have this than have a job. And writing requires a lot of time and a lot of energy. And you've got your other there, significant other there, and you're thinking, I shouldn't be spending time with her, I should be spending it on my writing. If I concentrated completely on my writing, I'd be able to build my career, and we would be in much better financial condition. How do you handle those thoughts?
Conflicting emotions.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good question, because to me that's a question about sort of priorities, and balance. Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you guys have any starter thoughts on that one?
I mean, I think there's sadly a lot of it just comes down to strict money, right? You have a certain number of bills each month, and they got to get paid, and you can float them for a little bit as you're doing stuff, but essentially there's a certain point where Aubrey and I have had to look at what we're doing and then downsize what we're doing. So 7-8 years back, my comic hoarding had to stop. It was tying up whatever, $200 a month or $100 a month. It was absurd, right? But we didn't have kids at the time. I don't even know what I did with my money back then.
So it's comic books?
Yeah. So, but there can be, there's discussions from both sides. Oh, I got to give up this, I got to give up that, and you start making some, allowances and knowing where they're going to take, and I think the biggest part is, writers can do other things, right? So they have their own career aspirations outside of writing that sometimes take hold of them. And so just having real conversations about what you want to be doing. Yeah, you could be a full-time whatever. Is that what you want to do, or do you want to stay part-time? Or, if I stay part-time, I might get let go. Those are real conversations that happen, and I think there's part of it that has to do with can you survive with only one income, or with, less income, or what kind of income do we need to supplement what we're doing, and whether or not, and sometimes that you can do the math and go, okay, if we cut this, and this, then you can get this time to write. And sometimes it's if the algebra doesn't work out that easily. So for years, Aubrey had a part-time job, then the kids came, and that mostly went away. But part of it is she didn't have a full-time job because otherwise she couldn't write. So.
Yeah, I think that one of the sad realities that's a factor in all of this, I think that Phil is alluding to, is that there are a lot of really high-quality, critically acclaimed writers who are generating some really wonderful published work who aren't living off of it. And so when I have a partner who is working very hard on their art, I know that no matter how much time and effort they put into that art, that is not going to support one half of our household. No matter how much we both think that it should, or that it deserves to, or whatever, the chances of it doing so, just because of how the field works and how the market works, it likely ain't gonna unless he gets struck by lightning.
Or
And,
it could happen later in life too. You can't count on it this year, next year,
right,
maybe 10, 20 years from now,
Yeah.
it might hit.
exactly.
So what do we do to that?
And so the time that he spends on writing, he may be taking away from a job, he may be taking away from our relationship, he may be taking away from whatever else. So you're right, it is about juggling and sort of deciding on those priorities. And I think that that's a decision that each couple has to make. And it has to be something that you kind of have to make out loud, like it has to be discussed. It can't be like, well, I'm gonna do what I want, and because you're silently seething, we're okay. That's not actually good enough.
But I think it's part of shared values, and shared values could be religious, they could be where you want to live, your lifestyle, how we want to spend our money. But I also think it's how we want to spend our time. Because if you do have the day job, then the writing and the creative projects will fill up your social time. It
Yeah.
will fill up your
Oh, yeah.
so what do we want our life to look like? Do we want to go on trips all the time? Do we want to have kids? What is this free time, this extra time gonna be? And I think if you're not on the same page with that, or at least partly so, that's a problem. But I think it can be negotiated, and there can be a little bit of both. Because it is a lot of times, what are we gonna do with our evening? Because we know what we're doing during the day, or whatever your work schedule is, but what are we gonna do this weekend? And of course, there's all the family responsibilities and stuff too, so that's where I think that does need to be negotiated.
I think the writer also has to figure out how they can be more, in some cases they have, when they get that time, then they have to figure out how to be efficient with it, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's.
That's for another panel.
But for us, that comes down to not interrupting,
Right.
right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a part that we need to play, which is,
Yeah.
in that communication is key, because it's you're gonna get 2 hours tonight to work on it. All right, well, okay, that's not much time to write. So during those 2 hours, I can't be interrupted. And then you gotta work, you work on how that goes. But you can start, when you start carving out those time and those hours, sometimes ground rules need to come along with them on how to handle them, so.
For sure. Well, and I think with my partner, I know he writes at lunch, so it's not just about me, but he's being efficient by, instead of at lunchtime just eating lunch, he writes. And that's a time that I have nothing to do with, so I think he gets a lot done. If you write every day at lunch, that adds up, and so he's being very efficient. And I feel like my writer's very efficient.
I think I see a hand going up in the back.
Oh, yes, Mr. Merriam, what would you like to contribute?
Really nothing to that, actually, but I want to ask this question, because I'm looking at you four guys, two gals, whatever you are, and you are all four very supportive of your artist spouse, it seems like, which I have harped on and how great that is. But I have watched careers get put on the rocks because of the spouse who was not supportive. And so I'm kind of wondering, and nobody in this room may want to say, my spouse sucks at this, but they might. And so I'm wondering if you might have some advice to them to help them. Because I have watched really good writers' careers get tainted because their spouse didn't want it. My early career almost got tainted because of the spouse.
That is a big part of why, especially this time around, I suggested that we have this conversation because of what Michael's describing, what we've seen, how many people we've seen, either the career tanked or the relationship tanked. Sadly, either sucks. And I think it goes a lot to what Christina was saying about shared values. I think that was really well said. And I think that if you can get on the same team about something, that's really a valuable thing. Because I really wanted to speak to those partners of the non-artist partner about how fun it is to get to be a part of something like this. Like, I get to help. I get to join in the fun. I get to come to events like this. I get to meet cool people who are involved.
You get to read the story long before.
Right? I get to see how it changes along the way. I get to contribute. My ideas are in those books, and I didn't have to write the damn thing.
I mean, it's a fun conversation, and when you're in a long-term relationship, my writer and I have been in a long-term relationship, it continues to give you something. But it gives you something to continue to talk about and have to talk about. Instead of what was on social media or what was on TV, it continues to have a really great, rich dialogue. And so perhaps if you're a writer who your partner is feeling shut out, maybe bring them into your process a little bit and have them feel more part of the process. Because maybe you are, my writer talks to me a lot about it, even though I'm not an editor, and anytime a character gets written out, it breaks my heart. But we still dialogue a lot, and maybe you're a person who doesn't, and if you maybe reached out and included them in the process and that type of thing, maybe even if it's not your default, but make a conscious effort to do that. And I wonder, Conrad, if you're conscious of it, or if it just happens or what. But I definitely do feel included. Like you said, I'm on a panel, and I get to go to things and meet cool people.
I guess my wife is kind of the opposite, where she's super supportive. She wants me to write. I get cranky when I don't write. She wants me to go to this stuff. She just doesn't want to have to talk about it all the time.
Oh.
So she's super supportive, but like if I start the conversation, she just like,
No, glaze over.
hey, I'm gonna do this now.
Well,
I do that as well. I mean, there's times where I will just start yammering at me about something, and I can't, and if I'm not in that headspace where I can actually be part of that conversation, I can't. And so what I try to do is just let her know you're talking to a brick wall right now. I'm in this other thing working, because we've all got our own stuff that we're working on. But the attempt to include is always good. And there's times where I'm not. There's times where I can be right in the thick of it, helping her out with whatever problem she's got plot-wise. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think for me, one of the things is that from a strategy standpoint, it's really easy to get into the I need this, I have to have this, and get into very demands type conversation. And that's probably not the conversation you want to have with your partner. When you get into that, it's just, I mean, if you think of it from like a classic negotiation, right? You get into that and there's no give and take. There's, I need this and I have to have it. I need this, I have to have it. There's just straight up conflict. It's good that they know what you need, but instead you gotta figure out and work your way around things. Sometimes however you're going to negotiate, how writing happens and how the time that gets spent on what in your house, it's got to be more freeform. What you want from the beginning isn't what you're going to get at the end. You're going to get something different. You got to be willing to play with it, and also be willing to just say, hey, I want to try it for a week, or I've got this thing, it's deadline or whatever, and I'm trying to get done by this time. Can you give me this much time for the next couple weeks? It helps to just be open with those conversations and be a little bit less demanding, a little bit more flexible.
For me, like what I love to do is work with computers, and that's what I do with my job.
Me too.
And for my writer, or my creative, what's that is right? That's what she loves to do. And so it's kind of, part of it is just understanding that, the thing that I love to do happens to be a thing that society will pay me a lot, and pay me a decent amount of money for it. Whereas for her, it's society doesn't, right. But,
Well, I think the point, go ahead.
yeah, but I enjoy reading, and I can have those conversations, but also just like when she's writing and really excited about this thing or this other creative project that she's doing, even if I'm not necessarily part of it, I can be like, oh, she's happy. That's makes my life better.
I think it all comes down to, everybody has their own interest, okay? And your interest may, that particular interest you're writing may not please your spouse that much. But you have to find things that you do enjoy together, and you have to spend time on that. And I really, you know, as we've been talking for the last 35 minutes, but what I just keep hearing is balance. You know, that you really have to allow the creative to go off in their imaginative world and do what they need to do. And you got to have time for that. But you also have to have time for the relationship, time for the family. You know, and even if you're not into their, you know, into their, so much into their world, you still have to listen. I can do it to her all the time, you know. I'll come in and I'm working on, like, say, I'm working on her car, and I'm like, oh, well, this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and you know, the alternator, this, and she, I know she just doesn't understand or, you know, really care about what I'm talking about. Yeah, but she doesn't really care that, you know, about that detail. But just the process of me saying it out loud helps me to work through that problem. Okay, so she's a sounding board for me. And so when she comes to me and she says, I want to read you this section, what do you think, you know? And I'm not a big literary guy, so I don't necessarily, you know, I can't really talk about that much about plot and you know, all this stuff, agency and things, but I know that her just talking about it or you know, telling me what her idea and stuff helps her work through that idea. So even if you're not, you know, even if you got the blank stare, you try not to. You try to put the, you know, put down, I'll put my computer down and I'll stop. I'll look her right in the eye. And I'll listen to her and say, okay, now you have my full attention, you know.
And I guess
Even if you didn't a few minutes ago, okay, now I'm, okay, what? And even if, like I said, even if it doesn't do that much for me, I know that it's part of her process. Michael, you're done.
I was just gonna say for the other side, it's just for the artist that's struggling with the partner that doesn't necessarily do that, is figuring out how to do that for them. And
Dana?
I was gonna say, you know, and in some cases, it's just, one's gonna have to crash and burn, and that's just the way it is. At festival, we joke about, there are 4 kinds of Renaissance Festival spouses. There's the one that works with you out there, and those tend to either do really, really well or crash and burn completely because of all the drama that happens. There's the one that really enjoys going out there as a patron. They love to support you, they love to be there. And those almost seem to be the best of the 4 because the person just thinks you're the coolest because you work out there, but they're not gonna get into your space at all about it. And then there's the 3rd one that really doesn't want to have much to do with it. You go off and you do your thing, and then, you know, and we've got several Court Reveler spouses like that, you know, once festival's over, you're mine again. But okay, you can go do that, and we're all right with that. I can entertain myself for 7 weekends. And then there's that 4th spouse that hates it, hates everything about it, and either the lifespan of that relationship is going to be short, or the lifespan of that person's time out at festival is going to be short, and it's always one or the other. The compromise is never reached. It's insurmountable.
I would kind of tag on to that and a little bit on what Phil was saying, is that creativity is usually project-based. And so, unlike a day job where you're there from 9 to 5 and maybe you're hitting a hard deadline and so you're there a few extra hours once every so often, because it's always project-based, the balance is always doing this. Like,
Yes.
There's the downtime where a project just finished and you don't have a lot going on and you are all of a sudden very available for your spouse or for your kids or to, you know, dig yourself out of the well of household chores that needs to be done. But then as the project ramps up, the amount of attention that the project requires increases like exponentially. And all of a sudden, you're not making dinner, you're not, you know, dinner is now frozen pizza, frozen ravioli, or takeout for the next however long until the project finishes and you go back into the low part of the cycle. And so when we're talking about balance, I would say that it isn't, at least for me, a day-to-day balance. It's more of like a month-to-month
It might not
balance.
be, art is not 9 to 5.
Right.
You know, I mean, I can go to work and I can be working on a project or something and 4 o'clock comes around and I close up my laptop and I walk out and I'll deal with it again tomorrow, you know, when I'm being paid for it again. But with art, it's a 24/7, 365 business. I mean, it can happen, yeah, in the middle of the night, like you said. You know, all of a sudden I'll wake up and go, you know, it doesn't happen so much anymore because the computer's upstairs, but in our old studio apartment, I'd wake up and realize it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I hear a typewriter, so I hear a keyboard moving. So, yeah, you just gotta roll with the punches, you know.
So, my question is, I noticed a lot of you said that, you know, you were talking about how you got involved with your creative or your writer. And you said you were also, a lot of you said you were also creatives or writers, and I'm wondering if you still are, or if just your outlet evolved, or if maybe being the partner became your outlet.
Well, for me personally, I tried to make, I tried to make money as a graphic designer, and I couldn't find a full-time job in the economy. So I switched careers, and so you know, I'm very recently a tech, but you know, before that I was struggling to make a living as a graphic designer myself. So, you know, well, she had the full-time job.
So, I have done some writing, not much. Yeah, I'm really terrible. Good ideas, but really poor execution. Also, ADD means I really can't sit in a chair that long and do the actual, like, I could never do it. Like, and that's something that, you know, always impresses me about my creative, is that she can just sit there and churn for hours, and at the end produce thousands of words. She can also sit there and type nothing, which is also a part of the process. Patience and all that, you gotta learn. But you know, I don't read that much. I don't write that much. I probably, you know, I'm probably one of the least readers of speculative fiction in this room. I do it a little. I end up reading a lot of what Abra writes, but besides that, I'm engaged with Abra constantly on the topics, but I'm not reading it. But in my life, as a scientist, there's times where I'm using creativity and have the same type of project-based schedule that Abra has. I go into work and I call her up and go, "Hon, I don't know when I'm coming home tonight because things aren't working and I have to solve this problem." And that same type of drive and ambition and need to solve it or need to creatively figure out how to do something is there for me as well. It just works differently and I get compensated for it by a little bit more. So it's tough. It's really tough. Not that, but I try to help as much as I can. I mean, the fun part is I just don't know some of the nuts and bolts, right? So Abra will give me one of her pieces to read, you know, just to see how it is before, as kind of, you know, one of that first sounding word. And there's things that I just can't do as an editor that somebody who actually is an editor can do. Now, I can say whether it's terrible. I can say whether it's pretty good. And Abra and I have it set up that I'm relatively brutally honest, whether she likes it or not. And so I can say this is the worst thing I've ever read. It gave me a migraine. She has actually given me a migraine.
Fixed it later in edits.
And I think that's another thing, that's another topic of how you actually deal with the writer. Because the writer is very much, they basically are handing you their children and saying, isn't it pretty? And if you tell them it is ugly, you have to know how to have that conversation with each other.
So it's going to end up in jail.
You are not gentle, Phil.
A follow-up question for you. Did you know how to do that before you met, or did she teach you how to do that?
No.
After the relationship?
I would say I don't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. I still don't know how to do it. I'd say just like writing, it's kind of it's something you practice and you keep honing on. And sometimes you get better, sometimes you get worse. But it's just it's part of the gig of being a spouse. Is you're going to be the first person to hear about their idea, and if it's really dumb, that can be really difficult. And if it's really, really awesome, you can get really excited as well. But you're that first sounding board. So
I want to come back to that issue of how to deal with the writer's ideas and critiques, because that's a really good one. Before we go to that, I want to finish your question of like how much of our own creativity we express, or how much of that gets expressed through our creative person. For me, I kind of have two creative sides. One is through my work as a therapist and as an entrepreneur, I have very much that sort of creative, entrepreneurial, leadership-y kind of drive. And for me, that's a creative expression. But as far as like creating story and fiction, that up until the time I had a writer in my life, that was through role-playing games. And so I'm great at character, man. I can create some of the best characters, and that's so much fun for me as a part of role-playing. And so that sort of transitioned into contributing to Michael's work, was he actually took some of my characters and started writing about them in his work. And then it sort of evolved from there into, oh, and this is what happens with that character. And me telling him sort of, oh, and this is what happens with that character. And to the point that I sort of handed him the basic plot for a book, which he then wrote. And now I've handed him another plot for a book, which he's about to work on. And so it's become sort of more and more collaborative. There are many projects that he does 100% on his own. But there's sort of there's one series that is more collaborative between us. He does all the button chair, drafting, all of that, editing, revising, all of that is him. So I get all the easy parts of coming up with the brilliant ideas and giving them to him to work on. And that's been fun for me. And would I have liked to be the one to actually put the words down and have my name on the cover of the book? Hell yeah. But do I have the time for that? No. I spent 6 years getting a graduate degree so that I could be a therapist, and that had to be what took up that chunk of my life. When I was in, that career paper that we all had to write in roughly 8th grade, and you had to choose a career and like, write your paper about it, and I know that I had it narrowed down to writer or therapist, and to this day I can't tell you which one I picked. So I think I set myself up okay.
So what do you do when he doesn't like your idea and doesn't write with it?
That's okay. They still kind of percolate. I'll still advocate for it. I'll still be like, so, did we ever get around to that one character I've been talking about? And he'll say, he's very diplomatic. He'll say, it's in the hopper. He never says no. He never says, that's a terrible idea and I'm not using it. He'll say, it's in the hopper. And I know how the writer process works. Sometimes things sit back there for years and never come out. And sometimes things eventually come out.
There's a hopper on a wood chip.
If it were important enough to me for it to actually get written, then I should write it Madame something. I take that responsibility.
Wonder, I wonder if it might be helpful to take some courses in time management. That's one thing. Second thing, I know there's some people that think this is funny. Go to a marriage counselor and find out about these things. And the third thing is that there's a book out there. It's an older book, The Mirages of Marriage. And the guy says in there, creative people don't make good marriages. And I'm listening to you all talk about that. And I want to believe that that's not true.
Well, statistically,
It depends. I have
statistically, people who are creative tend to have more problems with, tend to have multiple marriages, things like that. Just because of the things we've been talking about, not being able to find the balance, not being able to, support their.
Not being able to make the relationship a priority anymore.
What?
Not being able to make the relationship as much of a priority.
Right.
I have other creative friends who are perpetually single, and because their art is their priority over everything else, and that's valid. But I think my personal opinion is that person is to take responsibility for that and say, this is what I've chosen, and not poor pity me, I'm alone. It's just, this is what I've chosen. But I would say being with creative has increased my creativity. Before I became an art teacher, I have a degree in psychology and I was working in residential treatment and found that fulfilling on some levels, but not so completely fulfilling. And so when I decided to go back to school and what did I want to do, being with somebody who really values creativity and having that be a big focus in your life made me feel like this would fit into our lives. Made me feel like, hey, I want to do that. This has always been a part of me. But, you know, and so when I chose sort of something in between, I have a very day job, there's the whole school and education aspect of it, which is very left brain, but then what I teach is very right brain, and so that has been a really good balance for me. Conrad's always doing very creative things. He does a lot more projects than me, and I find him very inspiring. And but I should use my time more wisely and stuff. And he reads nonfiction all the time about the creative process and about, I don't know, what's the latest thing that you're reading? You gotta be reading something that's inspirational, or what's the last thing you just finished?
Die Empty. It is pretty motivational. Get all those creative projects out, do not die with them in the back of your brain.
Yeah, right. So I mean, he's just like, wow, he gets so much done in a day, and so it makes me feel like I need to up my game. But I don't feel any pressure. I don't feel any judgment about whether I should be doing more or not. Because yeah, you do get tired at the end of the day, and sometimes you want to just do things that aren't necessarily a project, you know, because I do projects all week long. But yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But I think that, but I think the time management's good. Like, everyone probably should be reading about how to be better at managing their time. Because we only get so much and we waste a lot. But in general, you know, living and working with creative people is both really, really easy and really, really hard. And, you know, I think two non-creative people just, you know, that can have similar problems. I think it just comes down to the creative person has to some extent, be able to not think they're Peter Pan and not be able to grow up as far as how they're going to be adult and responsible. And on the other hand, the other person has to understand that the type of work that you've gotten into by being involved with this person is not 9 to 5, and it's not the same. It's more flexible. You know, and you just have to. I mean, I don't think they have to be worse or better. Just there's different problems with each spouse. You know, if Aubrey was, you know, like many of the women I work with at work, right? I have to worry about the fact that she wants to work 60 hours a week sometimes to further her career that way, right? Or, you know, and we'd have to figure out what to do with all that money.
Aren't you glad you dodged that one?
I know. But there's different conflicts with different, and so I just, you know, I think that it's all about how you work with each other and how you talk with each other. I mean, as you kind of hear from everyone, there's you know, there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of negotiation, there's a lot of just being able to allow them to be what they are. And that only works if the creative person understands that.
That's not necessarily a full license.
Yeah.
To just, okay, yeah. They have to come back to reality now and then.
Yeah, we get that.
It's a bargain.
Yeah, just because you get to go and do work in writing, and that's awesome, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's licensed to do it all the time. Sometimes there has to be other things that come in that are not fun and are real life. Sometimes it means, you know, I've recently started doing a small part-time job to just basically get about $50 to $100 a week, right? You do that sometimes just to, hey, we're falling a little behind on bills, hey, we've got to do something to do it. Now that's going to steal directly from her writing time, right? But she'll do it for 6 months and then she'll be back and having more time writing. And you just gotta, it's all about, you know, being open to those types of situations. And for us, not valuing, you know, the fact that you might be bringing in more money or whatever as some magical thing that entitles you to, you know, something you're not. Because it doesn't mean anything, you know.
prestige or power in the group.
But to a non-creative person, you know, I mean, money is a you know, it's a reward, and it is for the creative too. But I'm saying for the creative, there are other rewards.
Right.
You know, and one of those rewards is just the time to be able to go and just do what they want, whether it pays money or not. They're getting enriched. You know, they're fulfilling their life goals.
And we can learn from that example. Like, I mean, you're with this person who probably could live with far less money than they have right now and still be beautifully happy doing what they're doing. So maybe it's a good time for the non-writer to reassess what they want.
Yeah, what do I really need to be happy?
And for me, that's changed how I think about my own job and what I'm doing. So.
Yeah, I was thinking too that with time management, the creative person has to spend a lot of time seemingly doing nothing, because that's when they get their ideas. But the other spouse or somebody else might not understand that. Why are you wasting your time when you should be with me, or we could be doing things together?
Yeah, we have a deal in my house that if he's staring off into space, I'm allowed to say, "What are you doing?" And if he says working, then I take his word for it, because he's working. He may be staring off into space thinking about how am I going to untangle that plot, crap, I killed that character too soon. He may be working, and I'll take his word for it. But the deal is he also has to be honest. He may say, "I'm gathering wool." And I'll say, "Okay, how many bags you got so far?" And then we go from there. But that means, okay, I'm allowed to interrupt that thought process of gathering wool or whatever he was doing and actually ask a question or whatever it was that I needed. Sort of like we were talking earlier about interrupting the person while they're working.
So you have code words.
Yeah, exactly. We have this ritual. That's a very good word for it, the code words for it. But there's the trust in place of if he's staring off into space and he says, "I'm working," I trust that he's working, even though he's staring off into space. I know that work is happening internally.
And I don't know if everyone knows the term cat waxing, but one of the best things that happens in my house sometimes for its estate is when my wife really doesn't want to do what she has to do for writing, and she just cleans the house from top to bottom as a way to prevent herself from having to work on writing. But on that same note, just like you have really great thoughts cat waxing.
Writing it down.
So cat waxing is the last thing you'd ever do around the house is wax the cat, because you don't. And so there's that thing where your writer is just doing something, and there's no reason to be doing it. They could be like cleaning the dust off the top of the chandeliers, and you're like, "Why are you doing that now?" That needs to be cleaned. No, you don't want to work on your writing. But on the same point, there's certain types of, when they're having ideas and stuff, if they could carry around a notepad and then be cleaning at the same time. Sometimes you have this classic in the shower having ideas. Well, there's certain things you can do that are just as brainless around the rest of the house that can do it, right? And so sometimes it's about sometimes I assume Audra's come up with different things she can do that aren't just writing, where she's actually working in her head on writing. And that's key, because essentially in every relationship people have to bring value. And if your value is you're the writer and you don't do anything, then you're not bringing enough value to the relationship in other ways. So there's other things that gotta happen.
But I was thinking, in that negotiation and deciding, when is to be engaged with the family and when is to be engaged in the work. And I can see where a spouse who's not involved would feel like, "You're always doing that, you're never with us," or whatever. And I think maybe an important part of it is follow through. If you say, "I'm going to be with the family on Saturday," that happens.
Yeah.
That you don't say, "I'm going to be with you and I'm going to be engaged with whatever it is that we're engaged in doing together that's not writing," that you don't change your mind or be present but not be emotionally or mentally present, that you truly are present, because people know. They know if you're there in body, but you're not really there, that you really are present when you're present. And follow through on that. And then I would feel as the other person who got my needs met that day, I feel then more inclined to be like, go do your thing. You go do you be you. Because I had my warm fuzzy with you today. You know, and then I'm full up, but I'm okay. And I wonder sometimes the people who aren't, they're not full up. They don't ever get full up. You're letting me down. And that's why they then resent the time away.
And you know what, like, Dita's, I think is very good about, like, you know, she'll say, okay, well, what were your plans for this evening? You know, I'd kind of like to go do some sewing or something for a few hours. You know, you want to meet up around, say, about 8 o'clock, and we'll sit down and watch, you know, whatever show that we like to watch, you know, on that good night. And then I'll sew until that point, you know. And I'll say, I don't know, I can go either way. She'll say, okay, well, we'll see where we're at 8 o'clock, you know, see how we feel.
I think a big part of a happy relationship is, like you talked about values, is supporting each other's values, like having those shared values. But even if it's a value that you don't share, supporting each other's values. Like if my partner is into stock car racing or whatever, and I could not give a flying, you know what, car about stock car racing, you know, but at least I'm like, you go, babe. You dig that. But that means I'm going to want the same in return when I want to go do my thing. I'm going to want that person to be supportive of my values or my interests or my thing. And so if it goes both ways, I think that really helps. And so if my creative wants me to express interest and concern in whatever they're doing, then I'm going to want something in response. And maybe that something in response is time with the family. Or maybe it's, you know, well, let me go shopping with the girls. Or maybe it's whatever. But I think that's another way that it can go both ways, for sure.
I guess have you ever had to have those conversations where, you know, how can you justify spending the next 10 years working on this with the no guarantee of return? Because that's one of the things I'm definitely learning as I go is like, this is not a money-making venture in any way. You know, you have that idea when you're at the beginning as a writer that, oh, this is how they make money doing this. And now I'm learning, no, you don't. Not really.
I think for me, you have to adjust your expectations of what you mean by return.
Yeah.
And what kind of return you need out of this in order for it to be worthwhile. If by return it's this is going to have to support us as a family or it's going to have been a waste of time.
So I remember early on, Robert and I, we've been married 3 or 4 years. We were friends with Scott Lynch, and at that time he was writing for role-playing game books. And it was before he sold his novel. And I remember when he sold it, and I remember talking to him about how much he had made on it. And it was a multi-book deal, so it was quite a bit of large lump sum. But for the next 5 or 6 years, that was it. Like there was gonna be a payment this year, maybe a payment next year, and then there would be nothing for 5. And so understanding that, like you know, what would be in many cases rather than just breaking it for like the first 10 years was going to be basically a minimum wage job for those first 10 years. Understanding that's what you're going to get paid is what you're going to get out of it was a real thing to think about, right? And for me, I think there was a lot of you have to be comfortable financially as a family. Like, I mean, but part of it is building your life to be okay with that, and working with that, and then being accommodating. So, you know, there's certain things you're just not going to be able to do. I mean, I would love for Robert and I to be traveling around the world and doing lots of stuff, but you know, plane tickets to Asia cost a lot of money, and so that ain't happening anytime soon. But on the other hand, so you give that up temporarily. Maybe later on you can take advantage of that. Maybe you find ways to mix that in. You do what you can. But I think that at that point you're not going to be giving financially into the relationship with people. Alright? So what? There's a whole bunch of other things. And the sooner you can have that conversation and have a real conversation about it, like, hey, I'm not going to be bringing that to the table. If I'm doing this, I'm not bringing the money. But what I am going to be bringing is this, this, and this. And then say, okay, I'll do it, right? And then the other person's just got to be willing to have that. You know, and if they're not, maybe you're either not the right person or you need to figure out how you can come halfway. Maybe it's a part-time job, maybe it's whatever, because you can live off of that. But you got to figure it out.
There are a lot of writers who work full-time and do their writing on the side because that's what they have to do to contribute.
Well, if you want both, you kind of need to.
Yeah.
If you want that stable life, if you want the house, the car, you kind of need to. And I think that, but then that means that takes up a lot of your free time. What are we gonna do for fun? Well, some people go to the casino, some people have a cabin, you know. Everybody spends their money and time on something. How are we gonna do it, you know? And some, you know, so it's.
So I'd like to come to that question that we started earlier, because I think it's a good one, of how do you deal with, if your writer brings you their work for critique or feedback, and they're handing you their baby to criticize and judge, how do you handle that? What's the agreement or the relationship with that?
I think the agreement is trust. And they're trusting you with their baby. And they want you to be honest. I mean, if they're bringing it to you, then they do trust you, obviously, enough to allow you to critique it in the first place. So yeah, you want to be honest, but you want to be careful about how you word things sometimes, you know. You don't necessarily want to say, oh wait, sorry.
Your mileage may vary.
I think that raises the point of it depends on the relationship.
Yeah,
And where the
yeah,
writer's
it
at
does.
in their career.
You know, but I mean, like, I feel I can be honest with Dana. If she brings me something, I'm just like, I don't know, you know, but if you change this and this and this, always, and that's another thing, is always, you know, if you're going to criticize something, give them another option.
Yeah,
Give
be
them a couple more
constructive.
options, Yeah.
Yeah, the critiquing that I've done for Michael, he calls it the red pen of death, because I literally get out, I have a printed manuscript and I get out the red pen. And Michael slept through every English class he ever took. So I've had to beat each comma rule into him through the red pen of death. And I think one year for Christmas, I actually gave him like an elementary
Chicago
style.
Manual Style
Yeah.
15th edition.
Because I got tired of having to do it myself. You know, it only helped in the sense that instead of like having to mark every comma, I would just say, please look up blah, 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 blah in your manual. So instead of having to explain all the rules, I was able to refer him to a source. So my manuscript critiques do tend to be very bloody. And we do have that agreement of I'm allowed to bleed all over the thing, but I also do try to be, like you said, Eric, constructive. And I also try to give sort of reader response of, if something made me laugh, I write LOL or a smiley face, so that he knows what kind of a reaction he's getting from his reader in between all of the commas and semicolon corrections and all of that kind of thing. And so he knows exactly what kind of reaction, or if I'm confused about like, wait, I thought this person already left the room, and I flip back and it's not clear to me, then I'll write, wait, didn't this person already leave the room? Like, I'll give him that kind of feedback too, because I want him to know what the reader's going to be thinking, that kind of thing. And so when I hand him back the really bloody manuscript, the first few times I think I don't think he was super thrilled, but we've had enough experience with that now that I think that he seems to take it pretty well.
Actually, the first few times we'd be like, wow, I suck at this.
Yeah.
I suck at this, and I should just get a job digging ditches in the West.
But I think, I hope, I like to think that it helps that a lot of the red ink is smiley faces. So there's not just an association of red ink equals bad, I suck. A lot of the
No, I
red
think
ink.
that's just ingrained into us from you know, our teachers and our children, the red pen of death.
The red pen of death, exactly.
I do not criticize at all. I am the outlier in this group. Well, his writing's perfect. But you know, I like Michael. I don't
He's
care.
bright red now.
What, it's not perfect?
I am like Michael. I don't care about grammar. I don't care. So I'm not an editor at all. I don't. Even as a teacher, it hurts me to criticize my students' work. I feel like it's my job and I have to. But to help them be, be constructive and critique and everything. But I don't really want to critique him. I just want to support him. And he's got a writer's group. And I think before he came to the writer's group, he'd be like, here, read this, and all this. And I would, and it was great. And but I don't think I was very helpful because I really couldn't be constructive. Now, he tells me about things, and I have lots of opinions. And I'll be like, well, you should do this, or you should do this, or you could do this with the plot, or you could do that. And he goes, yeah. And he does what he wants. So, I mean, it's not like I kind of feel like it's his thing. And, if I did give him an idea and it did end up in there, I'd be like, cool, I would like that. But I don't expect him to. And it doesn't hurt my feelings if he doesn't. And I just feel like I'm too close to really be that helpful to him, other than his cheerleader and his #1 fan. And I certainly have read some of his earlier work, and then I've seen him change it, and it has improved. But I guess I'm just like, wow, I didn't even know that could be better. That's great. So I know. So I'm not like that at all. I mean, and maybe his stuff is terrible, and I would never know.
Everybody send your stories to her.
But would I even help you though? Because I would just say, that's great, guys. So.
But there's a role for that.
Yeah.
When it's published. Too late to change.
Each writer needs to work with the person they're with and figure out what that person can give them back on these things. Because no writer's not gonna they're not gonna just say, I just don't show anything to my partner, right? That's not how it actually. If there's a writer who does that, then that's good. But most times they're going to show something to the partner and ask for some type of feedback. And figuring out what type of feedback you're going to get and what they're going to give is important. Figuring out that you are going to write up every comma in the world and provide that type of feedback is useful, because every writer needs somebody who can do that, whether it's themselves or somebody else. Having a cheerleader, always important. Having somebody who's going to motivate you to continue to go on and actually think that you can do it. Because to be a writer, you have to think that you can write the next awesome thing and change, the world of writing with the power of your words. And some people need somebody who's going to look at it and tell them that it's terrible and it gave them a migraine. But that, like for me, Aubrey and I developed some of that. I'm not going to be very good with the commas. I will find things occasionally. I'll notice that a sentence is, so for me it's more, this sentence needs to be broken up. It is way too many sentences in one. Or it'll be, this works really well here, but then you kind of lose the tone for a little bit. Like it's more general when I read through Aubrey's work. And then there's times where I'm thinking about the larger game at play and go, okay, you've just done something really weird with this chapter, or your book was supposed to end here, why is it not ended? And then there's, and there's those kind of things that you kind of mix and match around, and you say, okay, what about this? But particularly my being blunt just happens to be, that's how I would look at things, and it took a while, but I think she can appreciate it sometimes. But know that you're handing that to, she knows that when she's handing that to me, she's not just going to get big cheerleader thing. That's not what I do. And I'm going to give her some of that, like at different times, but I'm not. But if she's handing me to look at it and tell her whether or not it's any good, I'm going to tell her whether or not it's any good. You don't have to do that. Partner doesn't have to do that. They can do something else. They can respond in whichever way they feel normal responding. And that's okay. Just got to understand what you're getting and what you want to give.
Yeah, he just needs to go somewhere else to get that.
Yeah.
And that's why he's involved in this group.
Yeah, I found that she doesn't, now that, when you mentioned the group, it occurred to me that since you've been part of the group, I don't think you've handed anything to me for critique. I mean, maybe, but I can't think of anything in a while.
So you're being left out, is what you're
So
saying.
she's getting, getting the critique that she needs.
Maybe you can spit elsewhere.
What?
I'm critique cheating.
Okay, so something I've realized as we've been talking is each of us has been with our partners for a long time, and our partners have been creatives for a long time. And so it sort of came to me to wonder, like, if you knew then what you know now, but I think a more interesting way of putting that is like, what do you maybe wish that you had known that you know now? Is there anything you can put in that term?
Remember, we're watching.
And it's being videoed.
So it's
Turn that thing off.
Uh-huh. So is there anything that you wish you'd known earlier?
You know, I think I wish I would have just known how much she needed to get stuff going at the beginning. We kind of slowly ambled our way into it, and I think we could have. I think that between the two of us, we could have gotten her going faster and moving faster at the beginning, and getting some of the skills. You know, going to 4th Street. I think she probably didn't do that for the first 5 years of our marriage. Getting her there would have been good earlier to really help her. That kind of stuff. Like, you know, so I was supportive, but I wasn't pushing her to accelerate at the beginning in a way that I think we've done later on.
Is that because you want to see some progress? You know, like you gain more respect for what's going on when you see, like, I guess with my wife, she was like, oh, writer, okay. Have fun. It's like when I go off to play D&D, like, okay. But then I told a couple of stories. She's like, oh, yeah, you should go do this now. So, like, you know, not that I've sold any professional level stories and like that, but, you know, once I started showing that this might go somewhere someday, then it was more like, well, you should start going, you know, oh, you're going to the con, good, go to the con. You know, because it looks like this might be going somewhere. So was it those little milestones that help you think, like, okay, we should start?
Yeah. I mean, there's part of that is, yeah, it was showing progress, but also it was just, I didn't realize what she needed to learn, and I don't know if she did entirely as well. I think there's a lot of stumbling at the beginning that a group like this, some of the conventions are really good for, as far as pushing you into getting better at the craft. And you know, she wasn't completely at the beginning. She didn't just think that she could just sit down and churn out the awesomest thing ever. But maybe she did at times. But
You have to.
Yeah.
How will you write otherwise? Yeah.
But there was things we could have done back then that could have moved things faster, and we could have afforded them. We just didn't do it and didn't know to do it. So then I wonder what I'm not doing right now that I should be doing. It's probably a long list.
I think,
Ask future Phil something.
I think for me, the one thing that I wish I had known then is how emotional it can be for her sometimes when she's in the middle of a project and things are just not going right at all. And I mean, it can drop her on the couch for the entire evening. And especially in society, whatever, as the male, it's like I'm supposed to support, I'm supposed to do something to fix this, and I can't, and as also as an engineer, it's like, I want to fix this problem, The only thing that's going to fix this problem is for her to just sit there for the next couple of hours, and, she'll come out of it, and you just gotta, you just have to know that there's nothing you can do, you just have to let them get through this, and they'll get through it.
I don't know. I mean, it's been such a organic process of Conrad evolving as a writer, and it is a very long process, I think, for when he first had an idea for a story and he started writing it and he was really excited about it, and he's really changed his focus on what he's writing many times. And I guess when it started, I thought he was going to write that book. Like that was the book he was going to write. And I don't know if that book will ever be done. And maybe it shouldn't be, because he did all this learning through it. I mean, that's when he started to read a lot more nonfiction, and he became part of this group and did a lot of self-teaching of how to write through that book. So who knows if it's even worthy of ever being published. Maybe it's just, he kind of learned how to write through it, and then now he's doing other things. So I think we all know that it's a really long process, but I didn't, and I knew it would be. I'm like, oh, he's writing something, that's great. But I thought it would be more linear, I guess. And to know that there's nothing linear about what he's doing at all. And I'm okay with that, because it's like, you do you, you know. But yeah, so I guess there's not like, it doesn't really make any difference that things didn't turn out the way as linear as I thought they would be. But it's just kind of like, huh. And it's interesting to hear you guys all talk, 'cause it's like, he's just like all the rest of the writers. This is not me. This is the process. And, well, okay, then we're normal. Okay. So it's been a fun ride for sure, and I look forward to it continuing, especially as we end in the next 20 years, end our day job lives and have more free time. You know, some of the best stuff's been written in life. So.
You're so open.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and because I think in a sense, the freedom of having it not be necessarily about the money, it's always a little fantasy that he's going to sell the bestseller and we're going to go, you know, live in Italy for a year. That would be awesome. But I mean, you know, well, you know, we'll just have to move on and go somewhere
Go to
else.
Greece
You
the
know.
next year.
All for research. But, and that's a wonderful dream, but I don't really expect that to happen. And, you know, so in a way I think having the day job that's never been on the table to stop having the day jobs. It's always been, this is what we're doing. And so it's just been a really fun adventure of things to do after the day job's done and what our lives will be about as we get older too.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, Christina, about, you know, hearing what it's like for other couples in this situation and how normalizing that is.
Yeah.
Because I think that, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, what do we do when we have the spouse or the partner who's maybe not as supportive or more, struggles more with having a partner who's trying to be creative or build a creative career. And I think, I wonder if that's something that would be helpful, because I know it's been helpful to me to hang out. I mean, I'm very active in MNSpec. I'm one of the 3 founders. I'm very proud of that, and I'll tell anybody who ever asks. What's that?
Organizer of the movie.
Oh, yes, and in part because I always, you know, at one time I wanted to be a writer, but I think that hanging out with people, I go to the conferences, I come to MNSpec events, and we hang out socially with a lot of writers, and having that normalizing experience of, oh, this is how it is, this is what it's like. It's not just my partner, the weirdo, who always stares at the computer. It's like, no, this is what writers do. This is what these people are like. This is how they enjoy and participate and you know, pursue their interest. And it's a perfectly normal way of going about pursuing an interest. And the people that they pursue it with and that they get together with to pursue that are pretty cool, interesting people.
Right on.
And so I think that would be another piece of advice I would throw out there about what if you have a partner who's maybe not super excited or even kind of obstructive to your interests, is see if you can get them around the ones who are supportive and excited. Because I'll talk their ear off about how fun it is to be a writer's wife, because I think it's a blast, man.
I think I think that's part of the normalizing process is figuring out that there's things that you may be doing both as a writer or as a spouse that just aren't productive, right? So, you know, there's the classic idea of the writer who's, you know, basically, you know, mood swinging and, you know, being crazy around that and it's essentially not being realistic. Well, in most of the writers I've met, that's just not the case. Now, they may have their moments, or we all have our moments, but figuring out that, you know, certain things are acceptable, certain things aren't acceptable, and just because you're a writer doesn't mean that you get free rein to do them, is good. In the same way, the spouse, like, you're not dealing with anything different than, you know, everyone else who has a writer or a creative person as their spouse. You're dealing the same things. There's always the issue of, there's usually an issue of money, there's usually an issue of time, there's usually an issue of space, and how do you work with stuff. And all of these things there's you know, hundreds of people out there who are going through the exact same stuff. And they're all coming up with different solutions, and one of those can work for you. And And so it's really, by talking to them, you get a good feel for those different options that you've got. And maybe what you find is that your writer's asking you to do something, and you really should just be more on the cheerleader element. Or maybe you are more comfortable being over here, and you got to figure out how you can communicate why their thing is now dripping with red ink, right? And you can figure out some techniques just by talking to some people who had that experience. I mean, I'm learning a lot still, so hopefully I get to learn more.
I wonder if one of the ways to get more time and save some money too would be writing on using the public transportation instead of driving your car. There was one guy down in Chicago, can't think of his name right now, the lawyer who wrote all those bestsellers. Who?
John
No, the other guy, Scott.
Scott Giroux.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah, he wrote all of his books while running on the commuter trains.
Right.
I mean, I used to ride the bus to work, and I used to get,
Yeah.
it was best time to read. Like, I mean, that's, I think what you're coming up with is that, let's say it takes you 25 minutes to get to work, and it takes you 45 minutes if you use your bus. If you're using that 45 minutes, if you use that 45 minutes for riding, you've now just saved money, found 45 minutes to ride both ways. So now you've just given yourself an hour and a half, and you've just saved how much money for gas in a car. And Aubrey, I know, rides on the bus, and for me it was when I stopped being able to ride the bus to my work when they canceled one of the routes, and it went from being a 45-minute burden instead of a 20-minute drive to being an hour and 15 minutes plus and what was in there was a 1 mile walk. Right, so Minnesota winter.
Wow.
Crazy, but not that crazy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, yeah, and you can find those places and figure stuff out and work through that.
Yeah, I did the studying for most of my master's degree on the bus, because I was riding the bus to and from work an hour each way every day for 3 years. And so I did most of my master's degree on that bus. The one downside is if you're riding the bus, especially with a transfer in the middle, you might be, right, you have to pay attention. So you might be transiting for an hour, but you're really only getting in like 30 to 40 minutes of good concentration time at best. So you lose some time. And then I was always and forever getting harassed at bus stops. You sit there with a psych textbook, somebody wants to tell you their problems. Always.
What you riding?
What you reading? How to kill people. It never worked.
So we need to build some trains in this town.
But absolutely think of creative ways. If you're trying to find ways to fit your writing into the day, you're going to have to be creative. And your spouse is going to have to be creative with you. And they might actually have really good ideas, because they might see how you fritter away your own time and have lots of suggestions on how you could be more productive and not fritter away your time. Whether they want to hear it or not. Whether they want to hear it, that's a separate place. But they probably know how you're wasting your time. I would bet they have a list.
Being aware to as a writer, that might change for me, because I used to be able to get up at like 3 in the morning.
Yes.
I used to need about 4 hours of sleep. And over the last few years, that has changed. As much as I used to. So, it's a waste of time, which is
Okay. You got to go to bed.
What's that?
You got to go to bed.
Gotta do that, yeah. Maybe the bed just got
Bed
too
got,
bad.
bed got too comfortable.
Bed got too comfortable. That's it.
So Conrad's not the only writer who doesn't sleep through the night. To get up and do things.
Yeah, he would get up at 3, 4 a.m. and write. and then come and wake me up.
Aubrey doesn't do that, she sleeps with the night.
Yeah.
All the small children.
Yeah, the only reason she wakes up is because of small children, and then half the time you gotta poke her a little bit.
I've heard that before. Can't you hear that?
So does anyone have anything to whine about? Like, we've been very supportive, and we've been very understanding, and we've been terribly encouraging.
Yeah.
But we also are well within our rights to say.
Nothing, not a damn thing.
Should I turn the camera off?
I think when issues have come up, I've just talked to him about it. You know, if I feel like he is a little too internally focused at his family's cabin, that, I mean, come on, you know, and he's very responsive to that.
Oh, when you're handling the in-laws and you're like, could you maybe help me out here a little bit?
So,
Yeah, when I was,
and we've talked about it and we've negotiated it, and I think anything that would come up in the future that, you know, because I think a writer can be very internally focused sometimes, you know, and forget about the world around them. Not meaning to be purposely shutting people out, but it can just happen. And I think, and not be a jerk about it, but just gently say, hey, this is happening, and this is how it looks to the outside world, and hopefully you writer people can be responsive to that and be like, oh, sorry to me too, I'll try to do better, and then actually put out that effort, and he does, so that's fine.
over Christmas when Aubrey was working on the circus book, she's sitting there, and we're over at the in-laws, so, which is really fun for me. I love my in-laws. There's no sarcasm. Okay, there's sarcasm, but the point is, it's sometimes difficult, and she was just locked in, working on, I don't know, she was changing fonts or space sizes or whatever she was doing at the time. But what she wasn't doing was interacting with her dad, you know, and just being there and being present as part of the vacation. She was very much trying to put in probably 50 hours that week of just churning on the book. And so, you know, we had to have a conversation of, you're not participating here, and this isn't acceptable. Like, and then they were saying, well, I need to do this, and this one. But yeah, we'll try to build some time into it. But have you thought that maybe the deadline you've given yourself is just, I don't know, crazy?
Just putting it out there.
And no, for me at least, I could have pushed that conversation more, and then there might have been, but I kind of let her sit with that, and the next day she came in and realized that, yeah, maybe there was a little bit of craziness to something, and there was one of the things that she needed to get done she couldn't do while she was on the road. She was like, okay, we'll push it back, the deadline, and it's my own deadline, so I can do that, I can move it, and then start being more accommodating. But but yeah, there can sometimes be a, hey, we're with family, how about we interact with humans again?
There are two things that come to mind for me, because I'll put my neck out there. One is art seems to me to be the only career I can think of where the less work a person puts in, the crappier they are. Like if, and when Michael is just really crabby, go right. But the problem is with our schedules being what they are, our schedule seems to get increasingly complicated, and to not allow him that sort of dedicated writing time that he really needs. In part because he's having to work more hours at his part-time position than either of us really want him to have to, and then the rest of our lives are pretty complicated too. And so it eats into his sanity when he doesn't get that writing time, and it makes him crabby. And there's nothing either of us can do about that except get him more writing time, which is sometimes feels like really difficult to manage, like we talked about. And of course, that hits always when we're at our most stressed, because it's happening when we're running ragged. And so that's a thing that we struggle with, and that we haven't quite figured out how to handle. We've got some ideas, though. We've got kind of a project in mind that we're thinking about doing to kind of restructure some things. So more on that someday, maybe. The other thing that I find that's always been sort of an internal tension for me is I feel like art is the only job, maybe, I don't know, where like sort of the purpose of doing the art and putting it out there is so that you get a response or feedback. Not necessarily, that's not the only purpose. You want people to just read it and enjoy it in their own homes, whatever. But sometimes it feels like, how do I articulate this? Artists need more of that feedback than other people doing other kinds of jobs. Like, nobody comes to my office every day and tells me, great work, Sherry. Thanks so much for doing that.
I hear what you're
Like,
saying.
nobody comes and watches me do my job every day. And nobody comes and watches a writer do their job every day. And I think maybe I'm thinking more of the performing side of Michael's work. Like, he does a lot of stage performing, and we go and see a lot of theater, and nobody comes to my office and applauds every time I finish a good day. You know? And I know nobody does that for you guys either.
When you're somebody who's creating something, whether it's written or visual or whatever, when you're creating a something, I would say the person who created it wants people to respond.
Right.
Otherwise because I also have friends who are very creative and they don't show anybody anything. So they really don't want it. They're
Right.
afraid of the response.
Yeah.
But if you put it out there, your child or whatever it is, see my little creative baby? Yeah, they are a person, I think maybe sensitive, maybe somebody who is needing that. And I think that's true, and I never thought about that. So I think maybe that's why I'm a cheerleader, is because I feel like that's what I should do.
Yes.
And maybe I could be more critical, but I don't want to be. I just want to be like, I don't know. I love, like, because I'm a teacher of art, I see other people's art all the time, and beginning artists, and art that is not perfect all the time. But I'm very accepting of that. So I think maybe that's part of the reason why I don't need his work to be perfect, because nothing's perfect. I don't expect anybody's product to be perfect. We're humans. And I just like to be a cheerleader of humanity and look at you made that little thing. Good for you. I mean, not in a condescending way, but I really.
I'm glad you put it that way, because I think you're helping me put my finger on it. I guess that what I'm saying is I'm envious. Because nobody shows up at my office and applauds at the end of a really hard day. I mean, we all kind of freaking deserve it.
For sure.
You get 5 stars on Amazon for me.
Right? Well, yeah, because we want our bosses to catch us doing it right. We want our bosses to realize how hard we work every day. And probably, unless you have a really micromanaging boss, they don't see what you do half the time.
Too often we get caught doing the wrong thing. And or criticized or nitpicked for the littlest things.
But yeah, I would say that, you know, artists can be a little narcissistic. I mean, they look a little bit too much at what they and trying to get feedback. You know, I've seen it. It happens. You know, I think right now, if you told Aubrey that she had a new review on Amazon, review on Amazon for her book, she'd have a hard time not checking it right now. Right?
Just twitching.
You know, or like, hey, this place wrote up, reviewed your thing, and she'd be like, what? I didn't see that first. But on you know, some of that same ego that Aubrey referred to earlier, needing to believe that you can create the next awesome thing, comes also with the downturn swing, which is when you get rejected. You know, in my line of work, I don't usually get rejection on that level, right? It's essentially like applying for a job constantly over and over again and getting rejection letters. And you might have to get 10 rejection letters in order to get one acceptance, and it's the same job you're throwing out there. You might have 10 things out there. You know, and that's crazy.
I would say there's nothing quite like dying on stage and you're up there all alone. And the light is on you in 2 minutes, and to your 7-minute thing, you're like, I don't know.
Yeah. You know,
now I have to go for it.
I'm glad you guys brought this up, because we're going to wrap up soon. And kind of a thing that I wanted to kind of talk about near the end was, how has having your creative in your life helped you? And one of my answers to that is exactly what you're alluding to, Phil, is like seeing how your creative has to deal with rejection on a near constant basis. has really taught me how to deal with things like constructive criticism and rejection. Like, I mean, sometimes I'll be sitting in a session with a client and they will tell me I'm getting it all wrong. And I spent $35,000 on a graduate degree to learn how to do this job. And it's kind of scary when somebody's sitting there telling you you're being an idiot about it. But being around you guys and seeing what you guys have had to learn to deal with about being, taking criticism in a graceful way and learning from it and dealing with rejection on a constant basis and what happens when that person cancels on you and never comes back and what does that mean? That's another kind of rejection. That's the kind of rejection you get in my field. And like, so learning from you guys and how you guys handle that has been really beneficial to me. I don't get nearly as much ego wrapped up in it as frankly I see a lot of my peers do. I mean, I care what the other person thinks, obviously, because I want to do a good job by them. But it doesn't like crack me down like it might have if I didn't have the experience that I have hanging out with writers and seeing the writers' experience. So that's one way that having a writer in my life has been good for me. So I kind of wanted to throw that to you guys and see what else you guys have.
Well, I think I said before that living with Conrad, who is very prolific and lots of fingers and lots of pies, doing lots of things, always creative projects going on, makes me want to up my game. Makes me feel like, gee, I always want to be more productive and do more. And I don't know that I think he has influenced me for the better. I'm critical of myself, so I don't feel like I still feel like I could do more, maybe I'm not doing enough. But I think being surrounded by creative people makes me continue to be creative. I think if I was with somebody who was not a creative, I would feel like there was something really missing in my life. And I feel like we're on this journey together. So I wouldn't want to be with a more normal person. I'm not normal. Then I'd have to explain myself to them all the time.
Right?
Never thought of it that way. It's a fun roller coaster ride.
It
you know?
is.
And I know I can be just as much of a roller coaster for her too. So.
I just want to say something. I would like to get your thoughts on the value of meditation in writing and also in dealing with your spouse.
That's almost a whole other panel. I've recently started studying mindfulness meditation.
I was in training a couple weeks ago, and they were bringing it up. Maybe it's my ADD. I don't know. I have a hell of a time with it. I just quieting my thoughts for more than 5 seconds is really difficult for me.
Me too.
Don't think about
can't.
thinking. I'm thinking, I'm not thinking about
I
thinking.
can't do meditation. I'm ADD myself, and I just can't do
I did
it.
it in college.
I've been studying mindfulness and meditation recently, and I do, no experiment. And I've learned of it, it's generally as a useful tool for dealing with emotional reactions to things. And I could see how it could be useful in dealing with any kind of conflict situation, especially those kind of conflicts that we've been talking about. So I could see it as a useful tool for that. Because one of the things that learning mindfulness practices, including meditation, because there's other kind of mindfulness practices as well. And one of the things that they can teach you is when you're having an emotional reaction in a moment, sort of be mindful of that, kind of step outside yourself, step back, recognize what's going on. And instead of being completely caught up and carried away by it, just have a moment to be aware and stop and sort of choose a different course maybe.
I would definitely say when you're having those discussions with your partner about what you want to do and how you want to get more time, having those types of conversations mindfully and trying to realize there's a lot of emotion on both sides, that's going to be more productive. If you're going into, I need more time to write, and you end up with an argument that's yelling and screaming, you've done it wrong.
Yeah, in part because when you're talking about someone's creative pursuits, you're not just having an argument about somebody forgot to pick up bread on the way home. You're talking about a person's identity. You're talking about something that's core, central to their core being. And so if you're arguing about whether or not they get to do that thing, that can feel really freaking threatening to that person,
Yeah.
right? It can, and so I think it's really important to have that mindfulness in that moment of that. Let's all be aware that what we're talking about is way more significant to the people involved than who forgot to pick up the bread.
Yeah.
And for me, we were talking earlier with what I've taken, is the thing that I've learned is for my career that's helped me is just what matters that's not money and a lot of, and the non-tangible benefits you get out of what you do and how you live. So when I think about what job I want next or what I want to do next, I think about things, you can go into just, hey, I want to get the promotion so I can do this, but, you start thinking about, well, do I really want that promotion? Do I really want to work 80 hours a week, or do I want to move here? So because I live with somebody who their currency isn't necessarily green. Instead, it could be, emotional fulfillment or time for other things. You start understanding, you start having to deal with it, and I've had to deal with it in a way that I wouldn't have had to deal with otherwise. And that's been really useful to me.
I would say for the meditation, if you're a person who has a hard time, like if you're waxing the cat too much, maybe instead of waxing the cat, sit down and meditate to get into your writer's space. If your spouse is saying, I give you all the time to write, but you're not writing because you're waxing the cat, meditation might help get you there, for sure.
Yeah. I was thinking this is the same idea. Say that you got a job, and a 9 to 5 job, and then when the job is finished with you, creatively write. If you finish that job and then meditate, I think it would help your mind to make that shift better.
Unplug, especially if you have a very left brain job, and then you want to get into your right brain, get your creative space, and get you there.